Welcome to SEAFOODIE, a podcast series that seeks meaningful conversations about the issues surrounding seafood and the complex system that gets it to your mouth. I'm your host, Chef Robert Jones, and I interview guests from all over the country who make up the fabric of our seafood supply chain. On today's episode, we're going to talk about a report that was just released that recommends the creation of a National Seafood Council to run a nationwide marketing campaign encouraging Americans to eat more domestically produced seafood. This is a common practice with other agriculture industries. Just think about slogans like beef, it's what's for dinner, and pork, the other white meat, that were seared into your brain in the 1990s. Our two guests were authors of this comprehensive report and talked to us about the importance of the effort. From Fort Pierce, Florida, we're joined by Dr. Megan Davis. Dr. Davis is a lead investigator and research professor at Florida Atlantic University's Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute. She has decades of experience in aquaculture, marine ecology, technology transfer, business, and project management. She's led a number of international projects in Florida and throughout the Caribbean, including as a co-founder of the Turks and Caicos Islands commercial-scale Queen Conch Farm. She serves on a number of regional and national boards related to marine science, including as being an appointee by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce to the Marine Fisheries Advisory Committee. From Boston, we're joined by Roger Berkowitz. Roger is the president and CEO of Legal Seafood Company, a restaurant, retail, and mail order empire with over 4,000 employees. He started working in his family's single fish market in Cambridge at age 10, and then held a variety of roles in the company before becoming president and CEO in 1992, and growing the business to what it is today. Previously, he has served as a member of the board of directors for the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, as president of the Massachusetts Restaurant Association, on the Leadership Council at the Harvard School of Public Health. He also won a James Beard Award in 2017 and was inducted into the Menu Masters Hall of Fame by Nation's Restaurant News. And like Megan, he is an appointee by the Secretary of Commerce to the Marine Fishery Advisory Committee, where the three of us served together and where we met, advising the Secretary of Commerce on living marine resource issues in his jurisdiction. Thank you so much for joining us today, both of you.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thank you.
So we'll jump right in. The two of you have spearheaded a project that was driven by a committee, but two of you took a lead on this. Over the last 2 years of researching, scoping out, and actually making a formal recommendation to the Secretary of Commerce to establish a National Seafood Council. And I wonder if you would just tell us, what prompted this, what prompted your interest in this, and why you feel like this is something that the country needs right now. Roger, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Bob. It was interesting. So, as you said, all of us are members of MAFAC, and going back about, must have been 2 years now, I was, asked to co-chair a subcommittee on commerce with Sebastian Bell, who heads up the Maine Aquaculture Association. And, commerce is something we want to try to figure out, how do we stimulate business? And we were looking at what had been done in the past. And there was something called the Fish and Seafood Promotion Act. And some of us remember seeing some cartoons about what that was. But essentially, it was to really stimulate seafood consumption in the United States. And so we started to sort of think of things back and forth. And the question was asked of the NOAA staff, gee, what could we do something with the Fish and Seafood Promotion Act to sort of re-stimulate seafood consumption in the United States, and what would we have to do? So it was sort of in the process of going through that we all got excited about coming up with it. Probably the most excited was Megan, and so that's why she got the job of heading up the task force to try to put this thing together. But it's been an exciting 2-year journey, and the recommendation has gone through. So a lot has gone into it, but a lot of potential. And particularly because in the seafood business, those of us, hear constantly about the imports coming into the United States, and certainly not enough is known about our national or U.S. seafood harvesting. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity.
Yeah, Megan, I totally get Roger's motivation. I mean, he sells seafood for a living. What excited you about getting out there and creating a marketing campaign to try to encourage people to eat more fish and seafood?
Well, being in aquaculture for over 40 years now, I've really taken to a love of seafood, both wild caught fisheries and also aquaculture. And I've always wondered why the seafood industry didn't have a stronger voice, a stronger unified voice. And so when this idea came to be, and when Roger and Sebastian started thinking about this as one of the tasks that we could work on, I thought, gosh, this would be so great to come together and to start to look at how we could promote seafood and have a voice behind that seafood in the United States.
I'm going to take a step back just for a minute and make sure our audience has context for understanding the very generalized approach that other industry-led promotion boards have used to boost consumption of their product. Here are 3 short ads from the archives that really make the point.
What more could you ask for in a 1.5-inch thick steak that cooks up tender and juicy? How about less? Pork, the other white meat.
A new American cheese snack idea. Grill it up and slice it up so little fingers can pick it up. Cut it up, fun it up, guaranteed they'll eat it up. American cheese. Kids are up for it anytime.
Word's out. The taste you love is also a good source of things you need, like iron, zinc, protein, and some B vitamins. Beef. It's what's for dinner tonight.
The cheese one seemed a little cheesy to me.
Yeah. So this idea is not new, and there's avocados, there's almonds, there's dairy, there's been these industry-led efforts before, but noticeably absent from that space has been seafood. What's kind of the history behind that, and why there wasn't a longer concerted effort to promote seafood nationally?
Seafood, from my perspective, was a late comer, onto the U.S. scene. I mean, it wasn't a staple of what people traditionally would eat. It was really in the 60s, and the early 60s, when there was an influx of Asians really into the East Coast. They were coming to Harvard and MIT, and they were doing things like studying computer sciences and whatnot. And their diets were much different than most Americans, in that much of what they consumed was seafood. And up to that point, because we go back to the 1950s, where selling seafood, it was really to ethnic groups, or your religious, and had to eat fish on Fridays. So, and also was very inexpensive and never the best reason. So it was always sort of cast aside. Seafood was never celebrated. Again, when the Asians started to come in and people started to study the Asian diet and say, hey, there's lower incidence of heart disease amongst Asians, lower incidence of cancer rates, and longer lifespans, people started to appreciate the nutritional value. And then, of course, a woman came on the scene, Julia Childs, and she started to teach people that you could take seafood and do great things with it and not be afraid of it. And so this happened late. I mean, it was pork had always been around, beef had always been around, all the other commodities had been around. Seafood was always sort of the stepchild, if you will, of protein. So it really had a late start.
Not only did it have a late start, but it looks like it had a little bit of a faulty start in the 80s. Megan, what's the history about why they kind of started this effort and then it evaporated by the early 90s?
Right. So the Fish and Seafood Promotion Act that Roger mentioned was put in place in the 80s, and it had 2 parts to it. It had the part to develop a National Seafood Council and Promotion Council, and it was funded through actually the SK NOAA funding for 5 years. And after it was established, the idea was that then there would be industry-led councils, very similar to these checkoff programs that we've been talking about in USDA. And so this could be by sector, by species. It could be multiple species or single species. That never took off. There was never industry-led programs in that. And so therefore, really, it's been 30 years now since there hasn't been a National Seafood Council. I think the idea from the conversations that Roger and the rest of the committee had with the seafood community as a whole, there's definitely a very strong appetite for something like this now.
That's interesting to hear. And so in that first, after the passage of the act, there was some money put forward, and there was an ad campaign run. And there's this famous ad, the Sturgeon General, from 1989.
Eat fish twice a week.
Your doctor knows.
It's good to eat. Helps your heart to keep the beat.
Helps slim you down from head to feet.
Yeah, will it meat?
So twice a week, seafood and fish.
Lobster. Scallops.
That's delish.
Haddock makes a lovely dish.
Holy mackerel, try monkfish.
Fillet of soul. So every week, eat fish twice.
Try halibut steaks.
Now, that's quite nice.
To cook a fish, take this advice.
10 minutes an inch, that should suffice.
So eat fish twice a week.
It's easy, tasty.
I think it's sheep.
The official spokesfish now will speak. Eat fish and seafood twice a week.
Roger, I'd say that one's pretty cheesy too.
Yeah, I would too. Who was the voice on that? Do we know?
I don't know, but it's a great one.
Yeah, very cartoonish. Good.
And, I've been involved with a lot of advertising over the course of my career, as I know you have as well. And it really speaks to, I think, what the problem you outlined, Megan, in terms of an industry-led effort is, unlike pork or beef or eggs, the broad spectrum of people involved in, quote, seafood is pretty large. I mean, I watched this ad a few times. I counted, there's 11 species highlighted in that ad, at least. I probably missed several. I didn't even count the animated ones. And then there's so many mixed messages. It's like, seafood will make you healthier. It'll make you thinner. It's easy to cook. And it makes me think, working backwards from that, there must have been some really intense conversations about what everyone wanted to see in the ad, all of the messages that they want, and they just kind of crammed it all in there into one really very busy ad.
No doubt. I mean, it was, we have some money, let's promote seafood. And seafood will have its challenges. I mean, it's kind of interesting because the first was the Fish and Seafood Promotion Act. Well, why say fish and seafood? I mean, that's sort of confusing in and of itself. So seafood, should really be, sort of the one sort of narrowing it and sort of narrowing some messages. And not to say that the messages can't vary, but you're right, to see 11 messages inside of a 30-second commercial is difficult to see and certainly difficult to comprehend.
Yeah, I think one of the exciting things that came out of this was the eating seafood twice a week, because here we are 30 years later saying exactly the same thing. So I think that's a good message to ring out loud, and to see how we can see if the per capita can take that challenge on.
I mean, I suppose one of the frustrating things is the seafood consumption has been relatively flat for the last, 15 or 20 years. It really hasn't moved. So, so there are opportunities there. And given that, some of us are biased, we believe it's the healthiest of all proteins, that people should be eating it more often. And also there's a lot of misinformation out there. I mean, from an educational standpoint, doctors, as a rule, as they go through their training and become doctors, they receive probably about 2 hours worth of nutritional training. It's not part of their program. And so oftentimes there's misleading information out there amongst the most knowledgeable people. And so I think we have an opportunity to educate the public in terms of why they should be eating fish and the healthful benefits and the fact that it's not dangerous. As an example, one of the messages out there that most doctors tell pregnant women is to stay away from from many forms of seafood, whether it be tuna fish or swordfish, because of the dangers, and they don't appreciate or understand that they would have to be so obsessive in their consumption before it did any harm, and you do more harm actually avoiding those fish than consuming them. That's the kind of information that should be out there in the hands of the public so they can make informed decisions.
I need to take a quick break to recognize the sponsors of the show, but when we come back, Roger, I'd love to talk about the opportunity that this presents to reconnect people to seafood and reconnect them with what goes into harvesting local, sustainably caught, sustainably raised seafood. We'll be right back.
The American Shoreline Podcast Network and CoastalNewsToday.com are brought to you by LJA Engineering, with 28 offices along the Gulf Coast. The folks at LJA Engineering are at the top of the craft in the areas of coastal restoration, coastal infrastructure, rivers and channels, numeric modeling, disaster recovery, and design and construction oversight. And now they have a brand new coastal resiliency department headed up by our very own Peter Ravella. Check them out at lja.com. We are also brought to you by Coastal Transplants. Coastal Transplants prides itself on offering specific environmental and horticultural expertise with practical first-hand knowledge of all aspects of coastal revegetation projects. Their high-quality native and wetland plants, extensive agricultural and horticultural experience, along with their skilled and respectful crews, make Coastal Transplants your one-stop solution for restoring coastal ecology of your barrier island community. Learn more at coastaltransplants.com. And we are brought to you by the Dune Science Group. Did you know that fiberglass is one of the strongest and most durable building materials in the world? That it is resistant to deterioration caused by UV light and salt water? Well, the Dune Science Group does. They offer a full slate of solutions for dune walkovers and boardwalks that are made of fiberglass and built to last. They can handle your dune walkover project from beginning to end, including permitting, design, and construction of the strongest and most durable dune walkover on the market. Learn more at thedunesciencegroup.com.
Okay, we're back. It seems like there is a real opportunity to boost an industry here, a domestic industry that is largely, locally caught seafood.
Yeah, I think you're right. But people have lost sight of the fact of where their seafood comes from. They just it's sort of generic. It's seafood, and unfortunately they don't appreciate the fact that they're in all these coastal communities that there are fishermen risking their lives at sea every day to bring in haddock. Well, in the Northeast, certainly it's haddock, cod, flounder, gray sole, halibut, and what goes into it, and getting it from the boats to the plates is something that's very special. And I think that we can bring attention to that, and we can bring attention to the fishermen and the stories of the fishermen out there, because I think once the public really sees what the U.S. harvesters go through, and appreciate also that we have amongst the most stringent laws in the world for seafood harvesting, it really puts local seafood or U.S. seafood up on a pedestal as opposed to some of the other product that's being imported in here. And I think that that's important, not for the industry really. And I think it's important to keep the industry alive, because it's a very difficult, going out fishing is very difficult. And we want to keep encouraging successive generations to keep doing it. And I think one way of doing it is to put a spotlight on how special this industry is.
Megan, could you speak a little bit to what the current trade balance is between imported and domestic food? I know you've looked at this.
It's about 85% to 90% of imports. Yep. And in terms of dollar value, it's one of the, after oil, it's one of the most highest trade deficit that's happening in the United States. So in terms of aquaculture, when I'm teaching about aquaculture and promoting aquaculture in the United States, there's such an amazing opportunity here for the advancement of more aquaculture farms and expansion of aquaculture in the coastal waters and in inland, in land-based recirculating systems and offshore cages. So I think, just as Roger said, the sustainability and the practices for wild-caught fisheries are also as stringent for aquaculture. So we're in a great situation in the United States to increase aquaculture, increase using fisheries in the United States to help balance that trade deficit and that large amount of imports that are coming in.
And the other thing, to Megan's point, is that the more aquaculture you have, you're automatically allowing for better sustainability of the wild stock. And that's important as well, because we have to manage the stocks. We want to make sure that they're not overfished, and it might mean that the wild stock, sort of garner a higher price point, as well it should. Given the risks and keeping it logistically from the boats to the plate. So I think it's a way to celebrate, what the industry is doing, as opposed to, bringing in product from overseas. And that's fine. That product is fine if they're eating more fish, but to be able to differentiate. And I think that the U.S. Harvesters should be differentiated in terms of what they're doing.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and we've seen that. To your point about the wild stocks, I think we've seen that already in some places where aquaculture has gotten a foothold, where the wild capture species become a little bit more of a boutique fishery that garners higher prices for the fishermen, while still taking some pressure off of those wild resources. So, Megan, in the report that MAFAC is sent to the Secretary with the recommendations, what specifically did we suggest in terms of how this would be paid for?
This took a lot of discussion amongst the committee in regards to coming up with that recommendation, and also from hearing from the industry and the trade organizations and understanding whether or not this could be an assessment fee-based, industry-led National Seafood Council, which is how the checkoff programs are all operated. They're all through assessment fees, and the industry comes together and they pay a certain amount based on poundage, based on weight, based on barrels or bushels or items. So that was something that we had certainly looked at with the industry and wanted to hear from the industry. And at the end of the day, the committee came away with the message that it wasn't the time right now for the industry to come together with assessment fees. And we recommended in our report that it be a congressional appropriation of at least $10 million, but we also felt that it might take $25 million per year to be able to run a really robust marketing, advertising, promotion, education, research council. And a lot of these checkoff programs bring in, hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to be effective. And that was one of the things that we kept hearing during our investigation, that it takes a substantial amount of funding to be able to run this properly. And if I could say one other point to build on what Roger was just talking about, the idea of a generic seafood council would be to help not only promote seafood as a whole, but it'd also be an umbrella for those other organizations that are doing such great work around promoting seafood, whether it's the nutrition of seafood, whether it's a species-specific seafood, whether it's for the fishermen in a certain area of their fishing needs. But what it would allow is this opportunity to amplify the good work that's going on out there, and for the good work that's going on there to be able to benefit from a generic seafood marketing council.
Right. I agree with what Megan just said. It's not meant to be competitive. It's meant to sort of enhance what others are doing. And one other thing from a funding standpoint, it's been suggested is that maybe some of the funding come from tariffs coming in from imports. That's certainly a possibility as well, and that would certainly benefit U.S. fisheries. But you know what? It's going to benefit all fisheries. Because even if we say, eat more fish or support the U.S. fishermen, guess what? The secondary benefit of that is that seafood is good, regardless of where it's coming from. So all are going to benefit from that. We're involved in the seafood cold chain, if it will.
So the 1986 Fish and Seafood Promotion Act is still in the books. So there's authorizing legislation for this. So what happens now that the Secretary's has your recommendations?
So although the authorizing language is still in the Act, the National Seafood Promotion Council from the past did sunset. And so it would have to be reactivated. And then based on the recommendations that the committee and that MAFAC voted on that went to the Secretary of Commerce, there's a number of changes that we'd like to have put into the Act or into the regulating language. And for instance, when Roger was talking about what the type of council should look like, what the members should look like, and sort of the makeup of that, we gave a number of different recommendations based on making sure that there were good metrics and making sure there was transparency and that the deliverables were shared with stakeholders. And so there's a number of things that we ask that the language for regulation or for guidance for this National Seafood Council be updated. And once that's been updated, it sort of smooths the way for industry to come in and to look at these recommendations and to consider this National Seafood Council.
So Roger, the listeners to this show, many of them are professionals associated with coastal communities who would benefit from this for sure. What sort of steps should they take to be helpful and supportive of moving this forward?
Well, I think that, as we found out when we did our interviews with many different stakeholders, that there was, generally speaking, and Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, real sort of enthusiasm. They wanted some kind of industry support. And I think up till now it's been very fragmented and been difficult to get under the tent. So as this goes forward, we would like to continue to see people come forward from the different, whether they're harvesters, whether they're distributors or processors, saying, hey, this is something we really need. And, send in, their thoughts about it as this thing evolves. I think, again, putting together a comprehensive, when I say comprehensive, a diverse group of stakeholders, under some good leadership that can drive this home will be beneficial. So I think that sometimes, whether, regardless of what part of the country you're from, you sort of support what's happening there. And I think the idea we're trying to get people to think of a more of a universal approach to seafood, and not just where they're getting their seafood from or how they're processing it, but be more supportive of the overall organization, because it's going to help everybody.
So Roger, you've been kind of a seafood marketing maven. I wanted to pull up an example of your work and see if we should be nominating you to run the advertising campaign for this.
Are you going to show that one? That one was debated on television.
Save the salmon. Save it so our children can witness the grace and beauty of this noble fish. Or just save it so we can saute it with our fabulous lemon chive butter sauce. This message brought to you by Legal Seafoods.
I think it's hilarious. And a very simple message, as I feel like that's the direction we need to go.
Right. So we could be a little provocative, I think. But, the idea is to just get the idea out there that seafood, regardless of the species, is certainly helpful for you, and it's supportive of an industry with a lot of hard-working men and women.
Megan, the reports on the Secretary's desk, what do we know so far about how it's being received by members of Congress or the administration?
So MAFAC voted on July 1st, and the report was completed and formatted by the middle of July. So it's only been a couple weeks. And so we know that it's been transmitted both to the leadership of NOAA and NOAA Fisheries, and also the Department of Commerce, the Secretary. So we're excited to hear the response. And we did ask in our letter that we would like to see a response, that we feel that the timing is really, really good, and that we want to keep the momentum up. In fact, that was one of our recommendations, is to keep the momentum up around this, because there is so much interest in the seafood community, and it will be so beneficial for the industry and for the U.S. consumer as well.
If we are operating under the assumption that in the near to medium term, Congress thinks this is a good idea as well, what does that look like? What is the, how do these other checkoff programs work? How big are these boards? How do they operate? And what kind of oversight they have, considering that they would be using in part taxpayer dollars?
So that was a big discussion as well. We had a couple panel sessions with USDA Agricultural Marketing Service that came to our MAFAC meetings. We had phone calls and webinars with them. We really wanted to understand how they have been so successful with 22 checkoff programs that they administer. They oversight, and they do budgetary oversight. They help with referendums. They help with moving these into actual checkoff programs. But once they're moved into a checkoff program, although the USDA continues to provide this administrative oversight, the checkoff programs actually function autonomously in terms of them having an executive director, having this board or this council, and but they do work with USDA. So we took this model and started to think about, well, how could this model come together for the National Seafood Council? And we did make a recommendation that NOAA Fisheries set up an office to be able to do administrative oversight, and that they were the subject matter experts in regards to fisheries, in regards to aquaculture, but that they also work very closely with USDA Agriculture Marketing Service, and possibly even have a memorandum of understanding to be able to make recommendations that they've used and use them within the National Seafood Council as well.
And stakeholders in this can be very diverse. I mean, it can be anything from Native American folks in the Northwest who are involved in the salmon fisheries. It can be large and small processing operations. It can be, Megan's point, aquaculture. Maybe some public health and nutrition officials sitting on this. Mm-hmm. So making it as diverse and comprehensive as possible, getting a number of voices in there, again, with one agenda, with one mission, and that's to sort of raise the public's consciousness in terms of seafood and seafood consumption. And certainly, I don't think any of us would disagree that seafood is perhaps the healthiest of all proteins out there, and we should be celebrating it, and we should be enjoying it.
Agreed. And Roger, your funny and provocative ads aside, you had a company that is based on serving seafood to the public in restaurants, and that industry has been devastated by the current situation. Mm-hmm. When you started this effort with Megan and the committee 2 years ago, obviously we were in a very different place. I wonder, right, in a post-COVID world, if your thinking and motivations behind the importance of doing this have evolved in any way.
Yes, it's a very good question, Bob. And to your point, absolutely. I mean, most seafood is sold in restaurants. I think whether 60 or 70% of seafood that's harvested in the U.S. is sold in restaurants. And with that industry sort of devastated, the fishermen and the processors are looking at one another and saying, what do we do now? There's only X amount that can really go into the supermarket end of it. I can take Massachusetts as an example. So a group of us in Massachusetts have formed the Massachusetts Seafood Coalition. And it's an effort to work with the fishermen and state government. What we discovered is the Massachusetts state government has some entitlement programs where they have to take care of X number of meals in the course of the year. And there was a stipulation that no one either recognized nor appreciated, that they were mandated first to use products that were either harvested or grown in Massachusetts. And so we've come together and working with state government in Massachusetts to make sure that there is a focus on harvesting product that goes right into those entitlement programs, which include food banks and schools. And we want to keep people working during this period of time, but it's also an opportunity to really celebrate what, the fishermen and the processors and the industry itself. So I think that this program, and it's probably happening in other states as well, in some ways, COVID is perhaps a catalyst to get this going and make it more of a part, making it less of a commodity and more of a specialty item.
Yeah, I agree with what Roger says in terms of it being a catalyst and an amplifier to really push something like the National Seafood Council forward. We certainly, during our interview process with the stakeholders in the seafood industry, it started in January and it went through April. So we started to hear from the industry, what was happening with the marketplace, with the restaurants closing down, and with the imports export type of situation. So we could definitely see that there could be a really strong role for a National Seafood Council to help in times like this.
So I think it's really timing, and the timing for this is really good. I think that today people are more informed about what they're eating and how they're eating it, and sustainability and what is healthful. So I think that the timing is right for the National Seafood Council to really take off. And I think if we put our best efforts behind it, this could be something that's very, very positive for the industry, and not only positive for the industry, it's healthful for people's lives. I mean, this is a great protein. And we talk about preventive medicine. You are what you eat.
Yeah, very good, Roger. Yes, I think the consumer, keeping the consumer in mind all the time through this process that we just went through with the stakeholders came loud and clear. And it's very exciting that we're looking at both, the National Seafood Council is looking at both wild-caught fisheries and aquaculture. And there was a lot of unity around this in terms of U.S. seafood containing both areas, and that the consumer needs to be informed, and that as we discussed earlier, to really debunk a lot of the misinformation and to just make sure that people understand that seafood can be part of everyday life.
Well, thank you both. I really appreciate the time that you've given today, and then as importantly, the incredible effort, the 2 years of hard work by you and the rest of the committee on putting this together. I agree, the timing, it couldn't be more important right now. And I think a lot of people who are listening would totally agree. So thank you both again.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to thank Dr. Megan Davis from Florida Atlantic University and Roger Berkowitz of Legal Seafoods Company again for a great show and for their time. And of course, thank you to everyone listening to today's episode. Send me your feedback and show ideas to robertevansjones.com and subscribe to the American Shoreline Podcast Network on Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. To get additional episodes. And because the jingle is just way too catchy to ignore, I'm going to let the Sturgeon General have the final word today. Take care.
Eat fish twice a week.
Your doctor knows.
It's good to eat.
Helps your heart to keep the beat.
Helps slim you down from head to feet.
Get rid of meat.
Twice a week, seafood and fish.
Lobster. Scallops.
That's delicious.
Haddock makes a lovely dish.
Holy mackerel, try monkfish.
Fillet of sole. So every week, eat fish twice.
Try halibut steak.
Now that's quite nice.
To cook a fish, take this advice.
10 minutes an inch, that should suffice.
So eat fish twice a week.
It's easy, tasty.
I think it's she.
The official spokesfish now will speak. Eat fish and seafood twice a week.